I think it means that for some of us, what it means to be a GP is going to change over the next few years. But it's going to mean that we're going to serve our communities better. And I think that at the heart of it is the question of whether we're helping GPs do what only GPs can do. I think a lot of the things that we sometimes tend to do are just grab everything, even if someone else might do it better. A lot of the things we do are lovely, and I value them very highly myself. It's really nice seeing people who've just got a bit of a sniffle. It's really nice building that relationship, and some of our continuity with families is helped by the fact that often I see people who they don't need anybody. They don't need a pharmacy. They just need a box of tissues and 48 hours. But I quite like, and I grew up in a very old tradition of general practice where you just walk through the door, and if you're here, you see the GP, and that's great. And I think increasingly we have already moved away from that in many regards, but some of our colleagues find it extraordinarily hard. We've had some very painful conversations in our practice team about some of this stuff, and the nature of what it means to be a GP and some of the breadth of stuff we do, we're going to see changing a bit. I think there are some real wins in return for it, though. I think it means that we'll spend more time doing the complex decision making that GPs are good at, some of the really challenging, high risk, intuitive decision making and diagnostic work that GPs I think are probably uniquely good at. And then coordinating. We quite like working in teams, many GPs, but we spend virtually our entire day in a single room on our own. And I think that will be improving as well. But I think we need to be honest with ourselves and with our colleagues, and I think many of us here will be the ones who have to help our colleagues on that transition. It's not going to happen overnight. I think it's going to be a transition for people to go on that journey. Very quickly to finish, I'd like to share some thoughts about what kind of organisation we're going to be seeing in general practice. If you've had a conversation about the form of GP practices in the last year with someone, so if you've had a conversation about practices shrinking or merging or becoming part of a network or a federation, could you put your hand up? It's virtually all of us, isn't it? Everyone is doing this. You're not alone. It's not something weird about South Warwickshire. Everyone is asking these questions. What did I say? I do apologise. Shameful, absolutely shocking. Yeah, I really do apologise. Working in Manchester, having friends and neighbours from Liverpool, I get that. So everyone's talking about this, and I think it's a good thing to talk about. I think we've made some massive mistakes already, and I'd like to say some nots. So the first thing I'd like to say is there is not a single blueprint. And on behalf of NHS England, as the Commissioner of General Practice, I'm very happy to say, very officially, there is not a blueprint that NHS England will be publishing to tell general practice what should happen and what it should look like, either in South Warwickshire or Worcestershire. And there isn't a blueprint for many reasons. The most obvious is that one size really does not fit all. We've been down that route in the past in the NHS, and we invented Darcy centres, for example, which were a brilliant solution for central London. They really were. Brilliant idea. But for us in central Manchester, they didn't really work, and for many people they worked even less well. One size will never fit all because our populations are different, our starting points are different, people, places and geographies are all very, very different. The other thing is that actually I don't think anyone can look 20 years into the future and say, well, obviously this is the model. I think we can, though, point to some really important principles that I hope you will find helpful in your own conversations. And these are principles which we are helpfully having proven and tested out, and they're coming out of the work people are doing in the Challenge Fund. It's been really good being able to watch, as for 18 months now, groups of practices everywhere on the spectrum, and I mean everywhere on the spectrum, have been working on stuff. Like I said, we've gone from groups of 2 practices to groups of nearly 400 practices. We've had people who describe themselves as an association who've said, don't call us a network, we're not a network, we don't belong to one another, we're just an association. Have people who are a network, people who are federations. Some of those federations have been a few days old, some were formed just for the Challenge Fund. Others have been around for 5 or 6 years or 10 years, and you will have heard about them, you will have read them being quoted by senior politicians as shining examples of the future. Some have been single practices, so really big populations all merged together. What we have seen so far is that form is not really that important to changing the actual care for patients. Behaviour and belief and staff commitment are the chief things that change behaviour for patients. Form is really important for making it sustainable. Form is really important if you want to hold it together, if you want to achieve some economies of scale, if you want to employ new staff, if you want to get a contract as a group of practices to do something, then actually saying, we're 37 practices, all individual, don't call us a network, but we'll work together, please give us a contract. The answer from everyone is going to be no. You're not going to get to sit around the table when it comes to talking about workforce priorities, because the hospital will be there and the community trust will be there, and there isn't room for 27 other people around there. There's some real benefits of being together. We've seen some single practices where, although they look like a single organisation, getting every single practice to do the same thing is utterly impossible. We've seen some other loose associations where actually they've all got exactly the same diabetes care pathway now, so that when 2 of the diabetes practice nurses go on maternity leave, you can have your foot check and your eye screening and your diabetes check at another practice, and you'll get the same care. We're seeing in the Cotswolds, where again, they've got a federation, but don't call us a federation. We don't belong to each other, They're sharing nurses. They've got a pool of receptionists. They've got a standard approach for dealing with people when they phone up. So you've got consistent care, so that you can get to see the physio who's shared between them all. And they're not a single organisation. They're just acting like it. So we're seeing some of the stuff people focus on, the bricks, the mortar, the organisation, is probably important eventually, but first you've got to design the care, which is why I go around the country talking about what the care looks like and the innovations in the care, and then ask you to make sure that you've got an organisational form that works for you and makes it sustainable for the future.